Sneaky, sneaky, we're going to talk about rogues today. Alright. Oh, this is kind of nice. I'll go with this. Hey everybody, it's Tristan. It's the D&D channel that I do. So I got a request to talk about rogues, the rapscallion, thieving, murdering class of D&D that are always good to get in, sneak into dangerous situations, get a shot right when they need to, and steal wantonly. So we're going to talk a little bit about the life of crime in the past, some things that are interesting to point out, and maybe after doing some of the real life lore, we can talk a little bit about the different settings and how we can play a rogue. I will say it's a bit different to do this compared to other videos because rogue is a fluid concept and there are a lot of historical precedents that maybe would be good videos to talk about in subjects of their own, so maybe I'll just do that, but I'll get a start with a rogue here. So the first type of historical antecedent to rogues would probably be organized crime, which in the Middle Ages wasn't really a thing. Feudal lords might have had criminal elements. They might have even had royal assassins, royal murderers. They would have had thieves and dealing with cut purses in their society, but there wasn't really anything organized. That's very different though when you get to burger kingdoms, which sounds cool, but it is when a powerful merchant family runs a city. Think about things like in Italy, where you had trade republics and powerful families. Like in the Renaissance, you would have had groups like the Medicis who ran cities and things like that. And these powerful, rich families did often hire criminal elements in order to carry out their purposes. They would murder their political opponents, they would steal from them, and they would make a bit of a cut. So there's a bit of an organized crime element there, and fairly often throughout history you would find powerful families that would use underhanded tactics in order to get themselves ahead in the world or make a fair shake of money. And then there's of course always highwaymen, who were people who hung out by popular movement routes, trade routes, roads, things like that, and would attack anybody on the road. These were common threats in places like the Silk Road, or people going on pilgrimage either to Mecca or to Jerusalem for Christians. So criminals who preyed upon travelers was a common occurrence, and so traveling was actually quite dangerous back in those days. I also forgot to write this down here, but pirates also play a pretty big role in the roguish archetype, and pirates are a pretty cool topic that I really should be doing a step back video about, but I'll talk a little bit about them. They were all over human history, going as far back as records to ancient Greece. And pirates are people who stay on the sea, sailing around, trying to rob other ships. This is pretty much how it's been for a good amount of time, though there are some interesting examples that in the Renaissance you had the Caribbean pirates that we all know about, where they actually had these rather multiracial, democratically elected ships that were a place where a lot of people who could make their way up in society congregated to make money in more illegitimate fashions. You also had the professional pirate, the privateer. A privateer was someone who was hired by the crown, usually by the English, in order to attack Spanish vessels. So they would pay pirates to attack the Spanish in order to disrupt their trade routes. And then there's, of course, the assassins. Assassins would be another common roguish archetype. There's actually a group of Muslims where the name assassin comes from, called the Nizari Ismailis. Where they got their reputation as assassins is that they were a sect that threatened the Sunni powerhouse in the region by having these mountainous hideouts and using darker, more asymmetric warfare in order to get themselves ahead. You're starting to see a pattern here. If you want to play a rogue, and if you want to make a roguish organization, or you want to deal with it, think about why people go to crime, why underhanded tactics are a thing. And it's basically, you are fighting a force way more powerful than you are and trying to take it down through any means necessary. There's also a few really cool aspects of roguish society. There's a lot of organization within D&D that was less of a thing in the real world, but they're still really cool to talk about. First would be Thieves' Cant, which comes from something called Elizabethan Thieves' Cant, which you can read up on, but also if you check in the description or at the card, there's going to be a Dale Kingsmill episode. She has a really great video about Thieves' Camp that pretty much describes it. There's also Thieves Guilds, which were actually not really ever a thing. The closest I could ever find was something called the Thief-in-Law in Russia during the Soviet Union, and it was a title for someone who had been given a legend of being in prison many, many times for different crimes, but I just seemed to be more ceremonial than anything. And funny, interesting thing about D&D's history is that a rogue, for a long time, until the end of 2nd edition, was really just a term for either a thief or a bard. The classes weren't actually differentiated until 3rd edition, when they implemented the rogue as the thief class. So let's talk about the rogue of the PHB. It says that these are people who are extremely skilled and experts at certain specific tasks. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get more into mechanics. And that they typically work for groups like thieves guilds, crime families, or as independent contractors. And I looked at a lot of the D&D settings, and thieves guilds with rogues is really all I could find. We'll talk a little bit about Warcraft. Warcraft does a lot of stuff with rogues that we could definitely use in our campaigns, because honestly, the way that a lot of D&D campaign settings talk about rogues is quite boring. First, we'll go into Exandria, the Critical Role campaign. There are 3 prominent player characters and 1 powerful NPC that are rogues in the Critical Role campaign. In the first campaign, you obviously had the half-elf twins, Vax'ildan and Vex'ahlia, who were both at least partially rogue. Vax'ildan started as a rogue and then started taking paladin levels later, as the story permitted, and Vex'ahlia started as a ranger who started taking levels in rogue later in the time period. And in the modern campaign, you have the wonderful goblin rogue, Not the Brave, who might be my favorite Critical Role Season 2 character. And according to the Tal'Dorei campaign guide, there actually is Lady Cassandra, the younger sister of Percy, the gunslinger, actually is partially a rogue as well. But I think that the number one thing that comes out that's interesting about the Exandria rogues, that they have a underground criminal organization called the Clasp, which has sort of pocket networks all over Exandria. Little families called Spirelings will run criminal and smuggling enterprises all over the civilized world in Tal'Dorei. Their capital is in the big city of Iman, which actually the Clasp keeps a distinct network of underground tunnels in which they organize themselves. And while reputation for them is just simply being seekers of profit, one of the things that the Clasp do in the Critical Role campaign, but also in the book they've talked about a little bit, is that they are the underhanded people that keep society functioning. You know, they are the people who are willing to do anything to make things happen. And during the Critical Role campaign, the Clasp is partially responsible for undermining the authority of the dragon Thordak when the red dragon takes over Iman, and there's sort of a calamity all across Tal'Dorei, and the Clasp are part of the rebuilding process, and their only requirement to help get Iman back after the dragons are defeated is to be benignly neglected. Because in the Critical Role campaign, there's always a time when you need to do something that is a little bit underhanded, and you can go to the Clasp for help. Thieves Guilds are also a big part of the Tamriel campaign setting. You have the Assassin's Guild as the really big one that shows up in every single Elder Scrolls game. They're technically illegal, but seems to be widespread. No one seems too interested in taking them down once and for all, which is very different from a more extreme version called the Dark Brotherhood, which are the more evil assassins and people you end up fighting more often than helping. There are also a group of legally sanctioned assassins called the Morag Tong, and that's basically it. They're a group of professional assassins that have writs where their job is to legally go and murder somebody. So these are all different types of backgrounds your rogue could have. Your rogue could be primarily a thief, they could be an assassin, or they could be part of some thing that shows up often as the elite mercenary or elite assassins of powerful leaders. Or, part of a secret society that does anything it needs to survive, like the Clasp. Now, Warcraft has all sorts of rogue-focused factions, and they all perform different tasks, and we'll talk a little bit about each of them. The first one that I definitely need to talk about that shows up first and is very old in the Warcraft universe is the Ravenholt faction. There's not a whole lot about them, but if you are a person who plays a rogue in World of Warcraft, once you get to a certain level, they notice your talent and they invite you to join. It used to be how you got to tech traps, but now it's part of a quest to get legendary daggers so you can go stabby. And during the Cataclysm expansion, they were working with a black dragon that was seeking to take out the other black dragons, which are evil in the setting. But then most of the members of Ravenholt were killed by red dragons in the conflict there. Many of them joined a new group, which is the class hangout place for the rogues in the current expansion, called the Uncrowned. They claim that this organization is very ancient and has been the secret hand guiding civilization for eons, and that all of those organizations are kind of parts of the same one. And they fight the Burning Legion, and they have a headquarters in the basement of Dalaran. There's also the Syndicate, which I think is a really cool rogue faction that I would like to use something similar to them in my own stories, which is a group of less than reputable former nobles in a kingdom that has basically fallen, that are trying to establish a power base in this former kingdom, fighting what little is left of the authority, and trying to make a new world for themselves. I do think that the idea of an underground organization trying to take over in the case of chaos and collapse is pretty cool. I think that that fits a lot of what would happen in a lot of these post-apocalyptic situations. In this case, it's the Kingdom of Alterac, which got destroyed by, I want to say, the Burning Legion in Warcraft 3. On the Horde, you also have a group of assassins, black ops people called the Shattered Hand clan, which started as a clan of orcs. They used to be known for the fact that they would self-mutilate themselves as being part of the clan. I think they're the ones that would actually chop off one of their hands and replace it with a blade. But today they are an organization basically made up of spies and assassins and things like that that fight for the Horde. Speaking of the Horde, on top of that, there's like a sub-faction within the Horde called the Forsaken, which are the sort of separate undead members of the Horde, because the undead have joined the Horde so that they could have two factions for World of Warcraft. And with Lady Sylvanas being more in charge of the Horde, these Death Stalkers, as they're called, kind of function the same role as the Shattered Hand, but for the Forsaken. Often, though, the Forsaken get accused of thinking more in their own interest than in the interest of their whole faction. So I am sure the Shattered Hand and the Death Stalkers have lots of rivalry going on there. And then there's the underhanded special forces of the humans called the SI-7, which are a group of assassins and spies for Stormwind and loyal to the King of Stormwind, who is dead now. So I guess Anduin, is he in charge now? I don't know. I haven't followed the game in a while. Then on the Wild West fringes of the Stormwind Kingdom, there are the Defias Brotherhood, who are trying to overthrow the Kingdom of Stormwind through organized crime. They're kind of the downtrodden trying to reclaim themselves back in power. You can find them all in the Wild West themed area of Westfall. And then in Diablo, in the first Diablo game, there was a class called the Rogue, which has been built up into a organization and society within the Diablo universe. They're called the Sisters of the Sightless Eyes, and they are peerless archers. One of the things that makes them unique is they have something called the Inner Sight, which is supposed to let them be able to see traps and see weaknesses in combat, and that's their big claim to fame, is that they are very observant. In Diablo 2, you basically are at a camp full of them trying to help them out. In my own setting, I have one player who plays a rogue, and he's more of a Robin Hood type figure, but has a criminal background. And a lot of what I am doing for the rogues is stealing a lot of Dale Kingsmill stuff with Thieves' Cant, but also this sort of underground language of symbols that works a lot like hobo symbols, which is a really cool thing to talk about. Hobo symbols they were sort of this underground carved language that hobos, who were traveling people in the Depression era, especially looking for work and following the rail lines, would use these symbols in order to give each other advice over, safe places to eat, safe places to go, places where you could get a free bed or a place where you could get a meal, things like that. Except I would use it to create a sort of organized criminal world where anybody who is part of the underground arts could walk into a town, find without being obvious, find somebody who is associated with crime and be able to find work. So if you're going to play a rogue, what should you think about? I think that rogues can be very different in the type of character they play. You can be the thief with a heart of gold. You can be the cold-blooded assassin. You can even be the wise woodsman. You really have to think through what your rogue is going to be like. Keep in mind that they can use all sorts of weapons, including bows and arrows and crossbows and things like that. So don't limit yourself to just the swords and the daggers and things. But think about what your character's relationship with the law is. You can be everything from a lowly cut purse to an elite assassin for a king. Both of these are stories that can work with a rogue. You're basically somebody who finds themselves often in fights avoiding a direct conflict and trying to attack when you get the opportunity to. One of the things that comes up actually out of Xanathar's Guide to Everything is that you might be able to think of yourself as having a benefactor, somebody who pays you or gives you criminal jobs, maybe somebody who has a criminal family that you're associated with, or just a rich person who hires you to do their underhanded deeds. You might have a rival, somebody who is also a criminal or a lawman who's trying to hunt you down. Both of those could work. You could be two thieves trying to out-thief each other. You could be doing the spy versus spy thing, or you could be the famous thief that the sheriff is putting his entire career on the line in order to take down. All of that. Juicy, juicy story. And if you are a criminal, you probably should figure out what drove you to crime. People don't usually choose crime as their first option. Crime is usually something you're forced into or dealing with because of dark circumstances. So think about how your character moved into a life of crime. For my character that I played as a rogue in a previous campaign, he was a street urchin abandoned by his parents who came into thievery and then later in life got adopted and brought into the field of archaeology, but still has that inner thief and raids tombs for money. My first character was a ripoff of Indiana Jones. And Tomb Raider, I guess. And the character that I have running in my campaign, who is a rogue, was an orphan as well, and grew up in an orphanage and actually does his criminal activities as a way to raise money for the orphanage he rose up in. He's a new player. It's a simple story, but he's got a heart of gold, and I like it. Now, as far as class features, rogues have a lot of cool, unique things that make them feel very roguey in their outcome. 5e is very well designed in this fashion. The first thing is you have several abilities that show that rogues are extremely highly skilled and experts at certain things. So if you need a certain job done, this is the rogue for you. First of all, they get several expertise skills, which means that they can get double their proficiency bonus at said skill, which means that they'll very likely be very good at it. But also later on, they get something called reliable talent, which is when you roll anything under a 10, it's a 10. They also have slippery mind, so later on they actually get proficiency with wisdom saving throws as well. So in many ways, if you are a person who does not roll well, a rogue might be a good option for you. Another way to emphasize the way that rogues fight in combat is sneak attack dice. So when you do damage to a creature and you in some way have advantage, which means attacking them while they're down, attacking them while they are in some way incapacitated. But also, in other situations, you can take care of things like when you're fighting a monster and there is another character that is friendly to you that is also within melee range, you can also get sneak attack damage. And these are d6s that you get to add to your damage when you hit that go up as you level up. And you can only do it once a turn, so really a rogue is all about landing that one hit per round that does an astronomical amount of damage. And rogues do end up doing an astronomical amount of damage. If you crit as a rogue, you get to double those sneak attack dice as well. So if, say, you do 3d6 plus your d8 for your rapier or whatever you hit them with and you crit, that's 2d8s and 4d6. Wow. 66, sorry. And of course there's Thieves' Cant, which we already talked about. It's a language used by the criminal elements in most areas of most towns. Most rogues don't use this as much as they should, and I do think that DMs should give you more opportunity to do it, and rogues should take the opportunity to use it as much as possible, because if you have a rogue in your party, your storyline should in some way have an underground or criminal aspect to it that you should use. Unless, of course, you're going the special ops way. You get cunning action, which is a thing for your action economy, so that a rogue, with the whole attack of opportunity thing, rogues can attack, but also then sprint or hide or disengage on the same turn, so that a rogue who's playing smart will be attacking and getting out of harm's way before the end of the turn, because their hit points are a D8, so they don't have a ton of health. And then on top of that, they have good dexterity and they're able to avoid danger. This involves things like the uncanny dodge ability, which lets you dodge big nasty area of effect attacks, and evasion and elusiveness, which all make you harder to hit, which is good because a rogue is very much a person who, if they are going to take damage, it's going to be bad. The whole rogue plan is to avoid taking damage whenever possible. They even get a lucky feat at a certain point where they get a little bit of luck. So let's talk about the different rogue archetypes that are officially published in 5e and how they show the wide breadth of different types of rogues you can play in a D&D game. The first, of course, is the thief. The thief is the most quintessential roguish of rogues. So if you like the stealing, if you like the breaking into places, if you like sneaking, this is what you play. This is what I play. This is what the rogue in my campaign plays. It's the simplest and most archetypal rogue you'll ever play. Their features include breaking into places and stealing stuff. The next official one is the assassin, which is a more murder-focused rogue. They have an expertise with poisons. They can disguise themselves to get into places. They're all about that hitman story, and it reflects in the mechanics by letting you get huge bonuses if you attack somebody and get the drop on them or attack them before their first round of combat. So trying to position yourselves high in the initiative and getting an attack before anybody else can do anything is really the assassin rogue's MO. Taking out monsters before they even have a chance to do anything. There's the Arcane Trickster, which is the rogue that casts spells. The one cool thing that sticks out about them is that they get a mage hand that is invisible so that you can pick pockets with a spell, but for the most part you are a mix of a rogue and somebody who casts spells. Most martial classes have one of these somewhere. Going to Xanathar's Guide to Everything, you then have the Inquisitive, which is basically you being Sherlock Holmes. All of the stuff is about investigating and finding clues and detecting people's weaknesses through your keen observations. The other way you could go is the Mastermind, which is a rogue class focused more on being a spy or being a courtier. You know, you scheme, you make plans, you manipulate people. That's where their features come out. You then have the Scout, which I think would be the closest equivalent to a ranger that doesn't have the magical powers. A scout would be your non-magical lone woodsman who is grizzled and knows his way around nature type thing. You're a survivalist. And then lastly, you have the Swashbuckler, which is very much the pirate that you'd think. They fight with the two weapons. They're experts at en garde. You know, this is the Three Musketeers, this is Zorro, this is Jack Sparrow type character. So what would I do with rogues? Well, I don't want to have Thieves Guilds in my campaign setting. I think Thieves Guilds are not a thing that would really exist, and I think that it's more interesting if organizations of criminals were done via something that's non-hierarchical and distributive. There's no real organization. It's more just a set of norms that keeps the criminal element going. But there are organized crime families that are often multiple in large cities and rivaled with each other and fighting for power over different things. That's smuggling, that's contraband, that's political assassinations, whatever job you need. I have several crime families in the one major city that I designed, and, well, I don't want to spoil too much for any of the players in my campaign, especially you, Kelly, to know what is going to be coming up with them. So I won't go into detail, but there's people vying for power, different races. I think if you watch my Tieflings video, you'll know that Tieflings tend to have organized crime families in large cities, but they're not alone. And like I said, I stole the Dale Kingsmill stuff when it comes to Thieves' Cant and the game, which, if you seriously watch the Dale Kingsmill video on top of this one. It's virtually an appendix that you need to read for this one. And yeah, crime is part of everyday life. It's a series of jobs that put you on the wrong side of the law fairly often, and I like it that way. So that's the rogue. I think I might break down more, especially if I want to talk about pirates or talk about assassins and things like that. I feel like those are subjects that I could make, step back videos about and then link back to this. So this is just the lowdown of the rogue. I hope it wasn't too short, but if you have more suggestions for what we should do a video about next, just put it down in the comments. This was based on the comment. And of course, like, share, and subscribe, and come back next time for more Tristan Johnson.